Hey, I'm Ed Stott with another episode of That's Helpful, the podcast where we're building our best lives one episode at a time. Now, that tagline suggests we are striving for perfection, but the reality could not be further from the truth. Even our best lives aren't perfect. Often we see so many of the traits and behaviours that we aim for as tied to our morality and who we are as people, how we look, feel, think and act. But journalist and author Rebecca Seal says many of the things we've been told are bad are actually just as useful as the good. Her latest book is called Be Bad Better, How Not Trying So Hard Will Set You Free. Damn, that sounds good to me. You might remember we had a chat with Rebecca, I think it was late last year, about her other book on how to work solo that I got some incredible feedback from you guys on. If you haven't listened to that one and that sounds like something you would need if you, like me, are often at home and going wild within the four walls of your tiny little apartment, please go and listen to that, because some of the advice that I had from Beck and have implemented has been really a game changer in terms of how I work. I'll link that in the show notes. Beck, thank you so much for coming back to chat with me. I really appreciate it.
My total pleasure. It's so nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Such a joy. So this book, like ordinarily you write about food primarily. And then, as I mentioned, your other book is on how to work alone without losing your mind. And this one is a completely different topic. What sparked this book? And tell me about your own battle with perfectionism that inspired it.
Yeah, so writing the first book, the first sort of personal development book that I did solo, How to Work Alone and Not Lose Your Mind, as you mentioned, opened a door for me to be able to write more about mental health and well-being, and to do more writing just generally outside the food world, which I was always very grateful to have my food writing niche. It's really useful, as you know, as a freelancer, to have something that you're well known for doing. We like that a lot. But I also kind of was ready and had sort of been craving for a while the opportunity to write more widely, which I had done at the very beginning of my career in my early 20s. And I guess solo gave me the kudos amongst the editors who I was working for to do more on those sort of mental health type things and post-pandemic mental health recovery and all sorts of stuff like that. And I was then asked to write an article for The Guardian, which was called Be Bad Better. And it came out on January the 1st, 2022. And it was 12 or 14 reasons not to have New Year's resolutions, but instead to be bad better, and to make peace with your worst habits, basically, and your worst physical attributes, and I put worst very much in quotes there. And it was just this mind-bending experience, because the article came out on this, gloomy January 1st. And then my inbox just filled up with people saying, thank you for writing it. And all the comments underneath it were positive. And that doesn't happen, right? Like, no. I've never had that happen in 23 years of being a writer. And they carried on coming like over the following weeks, like, thank you so much. I really needed to read that. It felt like I could let myself off the hook. That felt so freeing to read. And I just started to think, I feel like this is something bigger than just a kind of 2,000-word article with 14 paragraphs in it. Can I turn this into, could I turn this into a book? And fantastically, the publisher who published Solo were really interested in that. And so off I went, basically. And it turned into a book of the same name, Be Bad Better. And I guess I thought at the beginning that I was writing a book that was very much in line with the article, like, here are the good things about being lazy, and here are the good things about rest, and here are the good things about not trying to be overproductive, and blah, blah, blah. And then I realized that actually, although it was that, and it is very science and evidence based, and there are 40 people interviewed within it, and experts from all sorts of fields, and behavioral scientists and economists and neuroscientists who deal with addiction and all sorts of things, I realized that actually the thread that ran through it was my own desire to get to a point of self-acceptance and my own kind of lifelong argument with myself about who I wanted to be and who I was able to be and how close those two things were ever going to be to each other, and where all the messages came from that I'd absorbed about how I needed to be a better version of myself, more good, and all the perfectionism that I'd grown up with. I'm an oldest daughter who grew up in the 80s and late 80s and throughout the 90s, very much that kind of era of you can do anything if you just work hard enough. And, the kind of the sort of American dream added into the kind of British Protestant workout ethos, like merging together to create this rather toxic soup that I think many of us have found really difficult in adulthood, that then came with a side helping of quite extreme anxiety and all the negative mental health and physical health actually as well, trappings that go with those sorts of issues. And I don't know, that made me nervous in a way, partly because it's very exposing and also partly because I didn't want to be poor little rich girl about it. I'm white, I live in a smaller body, I'm reasonably able-bodied, I have a lot of privilege. It felt a bit complicated to be like, but actually it's very hard for me too. But at the same time, I think that a lot of what I was calling out were and what I continue to call out in social media and articles is about structural inequality, which I suffer less from than a lot of people. But that isn't to say that there is none in my life. And being able to recognize the way that that structural inequality plays out in all of our lives and impacts all of us is really important in each individual life, because it's only by seeing it in our own lives and then being able to see it in other people's lives that we can start to make structural changes collectively, which is how all this stuff has to be dealt with. We can't fix these problems individually. And when I'm talking about those problems, I mean problems like the way that women in particular are taught to feel about their bodies, the messaging that we get about how our appearance is one of the most, if not the most important thing about us, and the impact that has on all of us, from those of us who live in smaller white bodies all across the spectrum, and the degree to which we have to kind of get to grips with and recognize problems like that in order that we can ever kind of facilitate change. So it was like kept swinging from this micro kind of like my tiny life to this macro, it's the whole system, the whole of culture is ruined, and then back again kind of thing, which was quite mind-bending, also quite life-changing, and sort of felt very big. And then I'd be talking about very small things like how much we think about how we decorate our houses, and, how intensely we can pressurize ourselves to live perfectly in a sort of visual sense. And then, zoom out again and be like, this is because of healthcare inequality. That's a global issue or whatever. Yeah.
Oh, it's like, wild.
Yeah, it was a bit of a wild ride actually writing it. A bit kind of, it was a lot. It was a lot.
Yeah, I bet. Because then it's hard, because then you swing between feeling like crazy empowered and like you really understand what's causing all these emotions in you. And then that feeling of futility when you realize how big this all is. It's a lot to take on.
Yeah. Although I would say, although you could experience it as a kind of futility, I think I also found it quite liberating, because I was also able to say, so little of this is my fault, So I'd very much, again, because of the kind of 80s, 90s era of kind of psychological well-being that I grew up in, I had very much believed or learned to believe that my kind of anxiety, my perfectionism, my kind of intrusive thoughts, ruminating, all of those things, if I just tried hard enough at something of the many things that I've tried over the years, self-helpy type things, if I just found the right one and did it properly and, just got my fucking act together, then I'd be okay. And that's not true for two reasons. Excuse me. Mm-hmm. That's not true for two reasons. One, that's impossible. You can't mindfulness yourself out of your personality. Like that's not true. And two, it doesn't need to happen, right? It's fine. These traits that I have are me and are useful in some circumstances, and in other circumstances they're annoying. But that's true of all of us. I'm not flawed, and I don't need to be fixed. And I think that message, that lesson was one that I just didn't get from the kind of cognitive behavioral therapy type world that I had moved through in my 20s. And also just the sort of the culture that I absorbed just wasn't really about the notion that actually you're okay as you are, and you're messy and complicated and sometimes annoying and sometimes irritating, and sometimes you frustrate yourself, and maybe you'd like to be different sometimes, and maybe you will be one day, but it's not going to be through like deep breathing and mindfulness and whatever the other try hard options that you could go for. Like, this is who I am, and that's fine. Yeah. It's not great. It's not terrible. It's not amazing. It's just fine. And that actually was that was a really game-changing revelation.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we just did an episode with Dr. Devon Price on unlearning shame. He is absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
But he was, and it's like all about systemic shame and pretty much exactly what you're talking about. I'll link to it in the show notes if you guys haven't heard that episode yet. But it's just so interesting when you start to peel back those layers and look at the things that we think we're personally responsible for. And when you can let go of those things, and how much time and emotion and mental labor that actually frees up to give a shit about the things that you can change is incredibly empowering, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, like, to flip it to a more sort of, well, actually, I was going to say, it's like, it feels as though it's a less important side of this topic, but actually I think it's probably just as important, is the relationship that we have with our bodies and the degree to which we're not in control of how we look, and the amount of information that we absorb throughout our lives that tells us that we are in control, we should be in control. And if we just tried harder and found the right thing, whether that's stuff you put on your body or things you put into your body or ways that you move your body, if you just found the right thing, you loser, you could just improve it all. And it's just not true. Like, we don't actually have that kind of power and control over our bodies or our faces or our skin or the way that we age, or, almost all of it is circumstantial. It's down to our experiences in life. It's whether we live in scarcity and poverty. It's how much privilege we have. It's how much support we have. It's what else we've gone through. It's whether we're dealing with long-term health problems or mental health problems. It's the space in which we live, whether it's safe, whether it's secure. So many things are actually far more critical than the food we eat in particular. The degree to which we move or not is probably more important, but it's still that, your capacity to exercise and do all of those things can be highly limited by your circumstances. If you're a carer, or if you've got small children, or, if you've got a movement limiting injury, or any of these things that we just don't talk about when we write. And I've been guilty of writing these things, right? I've been guilty of writing articles 10 or 15 years ago where I was like, you just eat more fiber and you just move your body more. Because it's what we go looking
for, right? Like, it's what we go looking for. We go looking for that personal fix. And we did another episode, which I'll also link to, about sleep, and specifically couple sleep, like how to get better sleep if you're sharing a bed with a partner.
Oh my God, I need to go back to that one. I've missed that one.
Yeah, you do. No, it's not come out yet. It's not come out yet, cool. But it will be out by the time this one goes out. Okay. I'm going to send it to you. But she is an incredible clinical psychologist who specializes in sleep. And she is really brilliant. But her main thing is, look, I can give you all these tips, but sleep really is a social issue. It depends on whether you feel safe in your neighborhood. Yes. It depends on whether you can get it, whether you are affected by light pollution.
Yes.
It depends on, where you live. Like if you don't feel safe, you can't sleep well. So no amount of lavender oil in the world or diffusers or face masks are going to help you with that. This is a social issue. And I feel like when you start talking about this, when you start looking at things, it's like there are so many things in our life that we feel like we have control over that we actually completely don't. And the thing is that in so many of these pursuits, when we go out, we try, we fail, then it just ends up making us feel worse about ourselves and doesn't fix the problem, because we're all so busy trying to buy the lavender oil and put on the sleep mask that we don't actually realize that the real problem is systemic.
Yeah, exactly. I've got a chapter in the book about sleep that says very similar things, although probably less like eruditely than a proper sleep scientist. But yeah, there's loads of research that's really fascinating that shows all of what you just said is completely true globally. You know, if you live in a dangerous neighborhood, then you sleep less well. If you're from a marginalized group, you sleep less well. And then they go to the doctor and they say they feel terrible and they've put on weight, and, you know, X, Y, and Z health problem has come along, and the doctors, the healthcare system, don't know this stuff as well. So they're not necessarily, you know, they might say, how much sleep are you getting? And if someone says, oh, well, you know, maybe 4 or 5 hours, or I've got insomnia, or, you know, I wake up a lot, or whatever.
That out.
Yeah, you know, then the finger gets pointed, you need to deal with that, or you need to have a medication or whatever, or, you know, you must go to bed earlier or whatever. But actually, those problems are not fixable by you as an individual. And that's the point I kept coming up against throughout the book. It was like, we're not responsible for these problems occurring, and we're not responsible or able to fix them. And like I said earlier, that could feel futile, or it could feel liberating. It could feel like, well, fine.
Yeah.
I can't actually fix this. I can't fix myself. I don't need fixing, and I can't fix the system. Like, I will do what I can to shine light on where things have gone wrong in my view. But I also can accept the fact that I'm not going to be able to mend these problems at the micro level of my own life, because they are massive, huge, overreaching problems that have impacts upon all of us that I don't think we've particularly got to grips with or recognise.
It's ridiculous. And like you say, you know, in the book, you look through the 3 areas of our lives: looking bad, feeling bad, doing bad. And so in terms of the looking bad area that you touched on a little bit earlier, the way that we, seek to control our bodies, which is just ridiculous. Like having, you know, been incredibly pregnant at the time we're recording this interview, nothing has humbled me more than pregnancy. You know, I used to think, I'm really into intuitive eating. So, you know, completely against diet culture, would never try to like control the size of my body through food or, and I've really been on a big journey with exercise in terms of treating it as something that I truly enjoy rather than something that's a punishment for my body. So I thought, you know, that I'd come to this place of just coming to this great equilibrium with how I treat my body. And again, as you say, I, you know, completely recognize the privilege that I have in being in a body that society deems acceptable. But pregnancy has just told me that I am just in no way in any driver's seat. There isn't even a fucking driver's seat. Like the whole thing's a ruse. Like your body is going to do what it wants, when it wants, at any time. So to have lived like the first 32 years of my life being told that, oh, but if you just exercised a bit more, oh, but if you ate less sugar, oh, but if you did this, it's like my body has just created an entire fucking human being, a brand new organ, and will get this baby out of me whether I like it or not in one way or another. There's no one in control. You can't control it. Your body's going to do what it wants to do, right? And yet we have this sense of morality tied to certain behaviors and that we just spend our entire lives beating ourselves up about. So I think like to come to the realization that you've come to, in that it's just like there is no point in making yourself feel awful for some of these behaviors that are just part of life is absolutely phenomenal. When you were writing the book, did you look into why certain behaviors are so tied to morality? You know, things like laziness or things like being more mindful or caring a lot. Like, did you look into the research behind that and why we find it so important to tie ourselves to these like moral ideas around certain behaviors?
I mean, I think, there's lots of different routes that I came across during the research. I mean, one of them, as I said earlier, and this I'm sure will be familiar to lots of your listeners, but there's the whole kind of idea around like the early Calvinist and Protestant work ethic that we exported from the UK across to the US, which then, you know, stopped being about Calvinism or even Protestantism relatively quickly, but has left this this kind of underpinning philosophical morality, which is about the kind of sanctity of hard work, the sanctity of controlling your body, the sort of the sanctity of productivity. And you can kind of see how just with those three things, if allowed to, and then exported back out to us and to you guys and, you know, across the world, those three things alone can lead us to where we are now. The sense that to be in control of your body is to be morally pure is a very kind of, you know, that's a very Christian ethos. I mean, all of the Abrahamic religions have it to a certain degree, but like it's a very kind of puritanical Christian type of a thing to come to. And that sort of notion of like restriction and your ability to restrict being
willpower, self-control.
Yeah, exactly. An expression of your godliness, your commitment to the church, to your religion. So I think a lot of it can be traced back to that. And I kept coming back to, you know, I'd look at different things like, as you say, laziness or bodily perfection or whatever. And I'd be like, oh, that loops back to the same point as well. That's interesting. And I think a lot of it is quite, there's a lot of race-based stuff there as well. Like this notion that was very prevalent in the 1800s that, Sabrina Stringer has written about this, but more eloquently than I'll be able to put it. But her book is a great one to go to if you want to find out more about this. But she writes about the way in which the kind of the black body, as in the 1800s, was sort of more sexualized, far more sexualized, and far more associated with kind of like eating with kind of joy and abandon, and that was a bad thing. That, you know, from the point of view of a very Christian white population, that was kind of ungodly and a, you know, a very negative thing, and that to disassociate themselves from that was to mark the white people out as in some sense superior, which is obviously bollocks. But you know, that there is this kind of very racist, effectively very racist thread that you can kind of follow back, that has to do with the kind of depersonification of people during, and you know, when people were enslaved, and all of the kind of awful tricks that we had to play on ourselves in order to allow those kinds of terrible political setups to be maintained. So there's a lot of quite dark history behind a lot of it, I think, as well as the kind of just sort of straightforward religious rules type history as well. And then, I mean, there's just more straightforward things like, you know, wrinkle cream was invented because somebody wanted to sell more cream. You know, in I think it was I'm trying to remember exactly when the first reference to anti-aging products was as a proper kind of cosmeceutical thing, but it wasn't that long ago in the grand scheme of human history. And I think it was Helena Rubinstein, but I may be wrong about that. But, you know, they just wanted a new marketing angle. And so they decided, it wasn't a new invention. They just decided that this cream in this pot, which was the same as that cream in that pot, was going to be an anti-wrinkle cream. And ta-da, then we have, you know, we have the beginning of a whole thing, which is about our fear and horror of ever looking anything other than completely youthful. And so, you know, there are little stories like that sort of pepper the world of perfectionism and self-optimization. And now here we are, you know, in a world where Huel is a thing and people wear glucose monitors to try and perfect their food intake. And, you know, the internet is absolutely full of people doing videos going, do you know what you should do? Do you know what you should do? Have you tried? Do you know what you should do? And, you know, everybody is like slightly convinced that they should hack themselves into, you know, Rebecca Seal version 2.0 or whoever you may be.
It is exhausting, isn't it?
And I think it's natural as well. You know, we want to be our best selves. Of course we do. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be the best version of yourself. I just think we've gone too far down the track. You know, the consequences of social media, the consequences of an always on digital economy, being able to buy things constantly, being able to lie in bed worrying about your eye bags and buy a product immediately to soothe your worries and, you know, give you a dopamine hit. Like it's a toxic soup in which we exist in order that makes all of these things feasible and makes industries possible to capitalize on our manufactured insecurities. You know, it's all become possible in the last 10 years. And that's why we've got 7-year-olds in Sephora buying eye cream, you know?
Oh my God.
And that's where, you know, we have to accept that's where we're at. Like, that's where we're at. And we need not to be here. It's not a good place to be.
Yeah. And also, I guess the wonderful thing is that opting out is a form of protest, which is absolutely fabulous, which I thoroughly support. So let's talk about the doing and the feeling areas of our lives. When it comes to doing bad, I mean, you touched on it a little bit there, but why should we be embracing more of our laziness?
Because I think laziness, when you reframe it, is just rest.
Yeah, that's so true.
And rest is good. So that's the end.
Done. Thanks for coming on.
No, I mean, I just think that we misinterpret the cues that our body gives us all the time, our brains give us all the time. And we accuse ourselves of being lazy when in fact, all that is happening is our body is saying, please, could you stop for a bit? And it is okay to stop for a bit. And I think that's another thing that we've become very detached from, is the idea that it is fine. And I am very detached from this. Maybe lots of other people are like, I'm not, it's fine. I can totally lie down on the sofa with a packet of biscuits, but I really struggle to just stop. And I really struggle with the notion that anybody might perceive me as lazy. And I'm a real, like, you know, I'll sit down for a minute and then I fling myself back up again because I've noticed something over there that needs polishing or straightening or tidying or watering or feeding or whatever. Maybe a child. And so I wanted to talk to people who've kind of done more of that work, got to a point where they're like, it's fine if it's messy. It's fine if it's not finished. It's fine if it's undone, whatever it may be, your hair, your clothes, your face, your room, your house, your garden, your car might be full of crisp packets and dust, you know, whatever your shtick is, it's fine for it all to be left undone. And it's fine to go and sit under a blanket with a book and a packet of hobnobs and, which are biscuits I don't know whether you have them over there. I know you know they're biscuits, but I don't know. Depending on where your audience is, they're really dangerously addictive biscuits. And yeah, it was my relationship with that in a way that drew me towards those chapters. And the whole sort of, that whole section of the book is about things. I mean, none of the bad things that I'm suggesting people do are like infidelity or theft.
That's the other book. Yeah, that one's coming.
Yeah, book 2. But it's about being messy or disorganized or cluttered or or knackered or all these things that we're consistently taught that we should be we should be organized, we should be Marie Kondoing our whole home. And one of the things that I found hilarious was when I was researching the stuff about tidiness and mess and clutter was that Marie Kondo doesn't tidy her house up anymore.
It's a ruse. We've been sold a lie.
She doesn't. No. She's been interviewed a few times in recent, like the last year or two, and she's said, I've got small children, and I decided that actually it was more important to spend time with them than to have a perfectly tidy house. And I was like, yeah, it is. But unfortunately, you ruined it. And I don't blame her specifically because she was part of a whole culture. But you ruined it for the rest of us. You told all of us that we should be tidy. You made it into a massive
so much time
cultural tsunami
on my tea
of
towel
tidiness.
Drawer.
Yeah. We're all wondering about going, does it bring me joy? No, I'm not. I'm totally not. I'm absolutely serious. She stopped
and Mary's
being...
set the whole thing on fire.
Yeah, totally. And I think maybe that's all we need to know about how important
I love it.
Or not, being neat and tidy. Being neat and tidy really is.
Case closed. And so was there something that you heard about rest and allowing yourself to take a break that has changed the way you approach it now? If we are some of those people, like you said, who are always the people who sit down for a second, but okay, that needs doing, which I am 100%, that is me. And it's only getting worse. What's one of the things that, now sticks out in your mind when you think, okay, I do need to take rest, that's kind of enabled you to do that?
What do you mean? What did I learn that made me do that?
Yeah.
Or a technique? I think I just began to understand, and this was something I began learning when I was writing solo, that was like 5 years ago, and it still hasn't fully kind of changed my behavior. But I think I really began to understand that hyperproductivity isn't actually productive. And that you stand a quite great risk of damaging either the work that's gone before or the work that you're about to attempt to do. And then I sort of realized that actually that could be applied to life as a whole, that, my kids are only going to be little for a short period of time. And do I want to be, I don't know, loading the dishwasher or whatever it may be instead of doing Lego with them? Sometimes I do want to be loading the dishwasher and not doing Lego, and that's also fine. Sometimes Lego sucks and the dishwasher is a nice excuse. But this sort of constant doing and constant moving and constant achieving and constant trying to make everything perfect was actually very imperfect, because it was taking me out of the life that I actually wanted to live, because I was so busy thinking about how to make everything right and how to be a really good parent and how to think about all these things that I needed to do and wanted to do. That, it's very counterintuitive, but it doesn't actually make you good at any of the things that you're trying to do. So I think, it did take me years to get to a point where I was like, oh, actually, yeah, that's right. So if you burn out, you're not really good at anything. Yeah. Okay.
It's so true. And seeing rest as productive, you're putting fuel in the tank. And I think anybody who does anything that's remotely creative or requires any amount of thinking differently, that you just know that if you're completely burnt out, you're screwed. You're not doing yourself any favors.
Yeah.
And one of the other things you came across was mindlessness as opposed to mindfulness. Can you tell me about why this might be a great approach?
Yeah, so the mindfulness stuff I was really fascinated by, because
this was so interesting.
It just I think, again, this is really emblematic of where we are culturally in terms of how we deal with people's problems in their lives. We're like, ooh, this thing, it's cheap and it works for some people, so let's give it to everybody. Hence, we're in a situation where the NHS here actually prescribes mindfulness as a mental health intervention, which was never what it was what it was created for, was never what it was historically used for, and can be extremely counterproductive from a mental health point of view. And up to 25% of people who heavily engage with mindfulness mindfulness find that they have really negative mental health consequences, like nightmares. And yeah, I mean, it's nuts. Like you can have, it can trigger really severe rumination, nightmares, insomnia, anxiety, all of the things that it's supposed to be really good at helping with. And for some people it is, but for some people it isn't. And it probably should be handed out, not via apps and therefore with people, so that you're doing it as part of a community and as a collective endeavour, rather than on your own in a bedroom with an app and it going dong and telling you when to start and stop, which is just not enough support. But also probably should have a little kind of like side effects leaflet, like any other prescription would do, saying, for some people this will be great, but if you're actually really in the throes of a major depression, don't engage with this at the moment. It's not going to help you and it might be dangerous. So that's one aspect of mindfulness. And then the other was just like something a neuroscientist said to me, that we need mindlessness. Our minds need the opportunity to wander and to be completely unfettered and free. And phones in particular rob us of that opportunity. But, that's really when the default mode network of our brains kicks in. And we start to engage with kind of more creative thought, problems get solved in the background, all of that really great stuff that we absolutely need, that would otherwise have happened when we were standing in the queue at the supermarket or on the loo or any of the other places that we now simply look at our phones. And I totally do this, by the way. This is 100%. I'm always on my phone. So my default mode network is probably like gone or very, very rusty or whatever. So I'm not saying you're a bad person if you do this, because I'm totally doing it too. I'm just saying that, again, we're in a context where certain things are made really difficult for us by the structures in which we operate. And one of those is the digital environment in which all of us live, which make it really hard for us to switch off and to engage with the more creative sides of our brains. And I think probably in the long run, that will have cultural consequences that we, again, need to think, hang on, is this, it is really nice to be able to watch YouTube videos when you're in the queue at the supermarket, because it is a lot more interesting than being in the queue at the supermarket. And that's the problem, is that in every micro moment when you're trying to get through a boring situation, or you're on a bus or whatever, it's really cool to be able to watch like a really good clip from Friends or whatever. Like that's, our little monkey brains are like, oh, banana, yay. But that takes us out of what, how we've evolved. Like that's not where we have evolved to be, like constantly being stimulated and constantly being given little dopamine hits and constantly being distracted. And the reason that humans have created so much amazing stuff is probably because we came up with things while standing in queues.
Yeah. In your research and kind of the process of writing the book, one of the things you've also talked about is changing the way we approach some of our more negative emotions, things like anger or even things like anxiety. How can we get more comfortable with these emotions, and why should we not try and just turn everything into a positive emotion?
Yeah, that is like such a brilliant question. So getting comfortable with negative emotions is literally just about exposure to them, and not picking up your phone when things are complicated or difficult and looking at a video of Charles Darwin explaining evolution.
It's so tempting though.
It's so tempting. Because we're not very well practiced, a lot of us, I think, in knowing what difficult emotions actually feel like inside our bodies. Like we're so primed to try and get rid of those feelings as quickly as possible, like whether that's through chocolate and alcohol, which is they're my drugs of choice, or distraction, whatever it may be, even sleep. Some people use just checking out, going to sleep as a way of avoiding difficult things. We basically lack just the ability to recognize, okay, this is a really difficult feeling. It's telling me something. Like I need to hear this information. And I think that was one of the things that I had become very disassociated from, was like, this feels really complicated. What is it telling me? Like, what am I unhappy about? What am I anxious about? What am I angry or sad about? Like, all of these emotions have signal value. They're telling us something that we need to hear, and perhaps we need to act on as well. And not having those conversations with ourselves, and I know this because of my own experience of not doing so, is really dangerous, because you don't know what you want. You don't know what's right for you, or what choices you might want to make, because you're so busy saying, I'm fine, no, I'm absolutely fine, actually. Everything's absolutely fine. And then you become so tightly bound in with that idea that everything's fine, and you're very, very brittle, and it's all very, very tight. And then at some point it breaks, because it's impossible to hold all of that so tightly and for so long without at some point breaking. And the breaking is much more painful than it needs to be, and much more dramatic often, and embarrassing, and more difficult to pick up the pieces from afterwards. Whereas if you just gradually and gently expose yourself to the feelings that you will absolutely be feeling one way or another, just maybe all at once and very loudly, or over a more gentle period of time, because, as one of the behavioral scientists who studies anger said to me, he was like, in the next 365 days, there will be anger. There will absolutely be anger in your life. So you may as well figure out how to coexist with it, because it is going to be here. And the same is true of sadness and regret and guilt and shame and all of those things. Like, we all feel those things at some point in our lives, possibly a lot of points in our lives. And understanding how they feel physically and what they do to our emotional states, and then how to soothe ourselves and how to nurture ourselves and how to take care of ourselves. All of that stuff is like a critical component of being human that I don't know about you, but I certainly wasn't taught.
No, not in the slightest.
The phrases, and and this is no shade on my parents or teachers or anything like that, but like the phrases that peppered my childhood were like, you're okay, it's fine, it's nothing, it's just a tiny bump, there's little, oh, you'll be all right, up you get, off you go, it's not that big of a deal, do calm down, like, don't worry, I don't know what you're stressing about, there's nothing to worry about here, all of this stuff, like this kind of constant minimizing of our emotional of our emotional worlds. And I think that has consequences, because then, like I say, you become very ill practiced. Although I did hear a podcaster saying that she wishes, on the flip side, occasionally, that she hadn't taught her children to emote quite so well. And I was like, oh yeah, I can imagine that, actually. Yeah.
There's something to be said for bottling it up. Inconvenience.
Exactly. I was like, okay, there are speeds to a more emotionally literate approach. But yeah, no, I think broadly speaking, we should get on board with all these feelings. And again, because if you grow up with perfectionist tendencies, then that can be really hard to do, because it is perceived as kind of imperfect and unattractive, and can feel really dangerous and unsafe to allow yourself to feel those things. And because feeling those things actively usually means other people around you will know that you're feeling those things. And that can feel really, really challenging. But I would say that in the last year or so of doing this more actively, I think things have broadly been, it's broadly had positive results, for all that it can be quite hard. And anxiety in particular, I think, was the one thing I also just wanted to touch on, was that, I think getting to a point of acceptance of anxiety, like it will, again, like anger, it will happen. It's not a flaw. It is an emotion rather than an illness or a negative. Like, it is something which is going to occur and reoccur and cannot necessarily be controlled or managed. Just knowing those things, rather than what I believed previously was, like I said earlier at the beginning, if I just tried hard enough, I could make it go away. That's been an extraordinary shift in mindset for me. And that's why I wanted to write about it, because I was like, if changed my relationship with anxiety and really taken the heat out of it. Because if I'm anxious, one of the things that I used to think was, oh my God, you're such a failure. You've been trying to deal with this for so long and now you haven't. And oh my God, like I can take 50% of the pain out of the anxiety experience if I don't have that voice telling me off for not getting rid of it and not trying hard enough. So if I could have that and give it to other people, even if like only 5 people read that chapter and go, oh yeah, then great. Like it felt really important to share that. And I mean, I should say this was backgrounded by numerous interviews with neuroscientists and psychologists who feature in that chapter. It's not just me going, change the way you think about anxiety. Like, this is an actual thing.
You know what? Don't worry about it.
No, but it's an actual way. It's an actual modern way of dealing with anxiety as a kind of mental health situation. Which it
makes so much sense. Yeah, it makes so much sense, because I also think if you don't feel like you personally must continue to search for a cure for this problem that you see within yourself, like that's a huge relief too.
Yeah. And it gives you back time. I mean, and in a way that's, again, like it sort of threads back to what we were talking about previously. Like if you're not thinking about how to fix yourself in whatever way, your body, your brain, or suddenly acres of time are opened up to you. If you're not thinking about your eye bags and you're not thinking about, what the next product you should purchase should be, and you're not thinking about how to perfect your life, then you're thinking about how great your kids are, or how nice those flowers look, or how interesting this book is, or whatever it may be. I feel like I'm not there yet. Like I have not nailed this by any stretch, but like every now and then I realize that I've put something that I learned writing the book into practice, and that it is in some sense helping and freeing me up from where I was before.
Totally. And
I
even
do look
just
like I'm sitting in a haunted studio. It's now so dark in the background where I am. Like just my face looming out of the darkness.
Just the occasional spot of dust floating by. I love it. But even just listening to you verbalize that and thinking about my own experience recently of being pregnant, and that raises so many complicated feelings, because whilst it's a wonderful thing and it's incredibly exciting, you do also go through this sense of grief, right? Of the things that you are not just leaving behind, but, of the fact that things are changing. If you've come to the point where you are having kids, obviously you're getting older, so you're not, a teenager anymore. And so you kind of have to accept that you're going into this next phase of life, and you're kind of grieving that phase of life where you kind of have a lot less responsibility, and whilst taking on something incredible. But, I've spent a lot of time thinking about, how do you just like move on from that or deal with that? Whereas if that had actually thought, just sit with it, that is hugely relieving, isn't it? Because it's like, you're going to feel it anyway. It's something that is kind of part of the process, and you just have to move through. But rather than thinking, right, I have to fix this, it feels a lot better to think, this is just part of the process and part of being human, right?
Yeah. I think is just one of the really big things I took from writing the book. Like, this is just being human. This X, whatever it may be. This is just being human. Feeling sad is just being human. Having a body that sometimes does what you want it to do and sometimes doesn't is being human. And I think, you're experiencing the most dramatic, or one of the most dramatic phases of change that the human body goes through. But like what we also neglect, I think, is the fact that our body's in a constant state of flux. Like it's not one thing that remains unchanged. And maybe it would be healthy for us all to kind of grieve and celebrate that fact a little bit more openly instead of being like, la, 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 I'm not getting old. I just...
Yeah.
I just need a better concealer, whatever it may be. Maybe if we had a slightly more open conversation with ourselves and perhaps with each other about, how it feels to be in a body that changes constantly, slowly, or very rapidly, depending on the situation, and what the emotional resonances are of those experiences. Like maybe if we were keyed into that a bit more with each other and with ourselves, maybe that would be more comfortable. Maybe it would be easier. Maybe it would be a bit more gentle, rather than this kind of like, I just need to buy more things and to be a little bit thinner and a little bit younger looking and a little bit more successful with a little bit more money or a lot more money, Maybe we wouldn't feel those things so much because we wouldn't be trying to soothe away the things that are complicated, because we would just be used to feeling them every now and then, and that would be okay.
Totally. I guess this like strive for perfectionism too, it feeds back to that thing that the more you think about the thing, the bigger it gets, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you accept it and move on, it's a much better approach. Whereas if you're constantly ruminating, looking for a solution, thinking about how terrible it is that you're thinking this, like it just can get so blown out of proportion so quickly. Whereas if we go, oh, that's an interesting emotion, or, the house is messy, I'm just going to move on. Like it is hugely freeing. It's really interesting. Such a great perspective shift.
Well, yeah. And also I think the perspective shift too is about saying, where did the thing come from in the first place? Like, I find it much easier to release myself from these kind of toxic thoughts when I think this is something that capitalism has manufactured in order to part me from my cash. And so much of the stuff, particularly about bodies and faces, but actually almost everything that we've talked about is in some sense linked to somebody somewhere getting rich out of our insecurities, misery, whatever it may be, and so I think stepping back from those thoughts and saying, where did that come from? Who gave that to me? Who told me to think that way about myself? Is it real? Do I want it? It's more powerful than it's much more powerful than just over and over again being like, you should just accept yourself, like this is who you are, like just go easy on yourself, be gentle with yourself. It was actually much easier to say, wait, I think someone's tricking me. Where are they? I don't feel like this is, this doesn't feel real. Who told me that this was how I should feel?
Totally.
Like,
it doesn't make sense logically. 100%. Yeah. Makes so much sense. And so if people only take one thing away from being bad better, what do you want them to take away, Rekha?
Oh, man, it's like 90,000 words.
I know.
I would like
What's
them to
been the biggest game changer for you?
I would like them to take away, buy the book. No, I'm joking.
Immediately.
The biggest thing for me, I mean, I say it a lot, and I just said it just then, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but I think the biggest thing has been like manufactured insecurity is the kind of underpinning of late stage capitalism, and we don't have to play by those rules. I think that for me has been the biggest thing. I mean, apart from just this general sense of like, oh, I'm fine. Huh.
Which is amazing.
That's kind of it sounds like nothing, right, though, doesn't it? Because I think, it's not a grand thing to say. It's not like, what I learned was that, it's like, oh, no, I'm okay. I'm fine. I'm not amazing. I'm not terrible. I'm not, it's just, I'm fine. And that's enough. So I think I'd love other people to feel that way, actually. I'd love other people to be like, it's actually none of it's that important. It's fine.
Yeah, it's hugely liberating.
Yeah.
This has been such a joy to chat. But thank you so much.
My
I really
pleasure.
appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, Rebecca's latest book is called Be Bad Better, How Not Trying So Hard Will Set You Free. Highly recommend you go and take a look at it. I'll link it in the show notes because Beck actually dissects a lot of those specific emotions and feelings and things that we get caught up on. So if there's something specific that you think, oh God, I could be a lot worse at that and that would not be a bad thing, go and check it out because it really is a brilliant guide. It's incredibly practical, as well as, super interesting with all the research and the experts who are in there. So definitely check that out. I'll pop a link in the show notes and a link to where you find Beck's other work and the other podcast episodes that we did together. Because also, if you are a solo worker, highly recommend checking out Beck's other tips in that regard because you're going to find that incredibly helpful. I'm so grateful to you for joining us. I really appreciate it. If you're enjoying the episode so far, please leave me a review wherever you're listening. And also a reminder that if you want to watch the podcast, I know that sounds really weird, but it's also available as a video podcast on YouTube now, which is incredible. I know I've pulled my finger out and learned how to edit video, which is absolutely remarkable if you know what a technophobe I am. So don't let it go to waste. Go and check it out. I'll also put a link to the YouTube channel on the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Ed Stott. I sincerely hope that's helpful.